The train pulls out of Berlin's Lehrter Bahnhof on a cold March morning in 1890. On the platform, a crowd has gathered, not by official summons, not by royal decree, but by instinct. They press against the iron railings, calling out a name, removing their hats in a gesture that belongs more to funerals than farewells. Inside the departing carriage, a man of 75 sits heavily in his seat, his massive frame diminished by exhaustion and fury, his eyes fixed on the receding city outside the window. Otto von Bismarck, the Iron Chancellor, the architect of German unity, the most formidable statesman Europe had produced in a century, is leaving Berlin for the last time. He has been dismissed, cast aside like a worn instrument, no longer needed by the hand that once wielded it. The man who dismissed him is 29 years old. He has been Kaiser for less than 2 years. He has never fought a war, never negotiated a treaty, never navigated the treacherous currents of European diplomacy. But he is the Emperor of Germany, and in the constitution that Bismarck himself designed, that is enough. More than enough. It is everything. The Punch magazine cartoon that will appear 1 week later captures the moment perfectly for all of history to see. It shows a great ship sailing away from a small pilot who descends a rope ladder into a waiting dinghy. The pilot is Bismarck, bearded and immovable. The ship is Germany. The caption reads simply, "Dropping the pilot." In a single image, an entire civilization's anxiety is crystallized. But because the men and women watching that departing train sense something that history will confirm with terrible precision, that the hand now on the wheel does not know how to steer, and that the waters ahead are not calm. To understand how this moment came to be, one must go back not to the politics of 1890, but to the birth of a boy in the Berlin Palace on a stormy January night in 1859. The labor was catastrophic from the beginning. The child came feet first into the world in a complicated breech delivery, and the attending physicians, desperate to save the life of his mother, Princess Victoria, eldest daughter of the Queen of England, applied so much force that the nerves in the infant's neck were permanently damaged. The result was a withered left arm, 6 inches shorter than the right, partially paralyzed, and for the rest of this boy's life, a source of profound physical and psychological torment. His name is Friedrich Wilhelm Victor Albert. The world will know him as Kaiser Wilhelm II, and from his very first breath, he is a study in the gap between what one appears to be and what one actually is. His parents belong to a different world than the one into which their son will thrust himself. His father, Crown Prince Friedrich, is a man of genuine liberal sentiment, cultured, thoughtful, married to a woman who shares those inclinations entirely. His mother, Victoria, has brought with her from England the convictions of the prince consort. Her father, a belief in constitutional monarchy, in parliamentary government, in the gradual expansion of civic freedoms. They have plans for Germany, these two. When they take the throne, they intend to steer the empire toward a form of governance more resembling that of Britain, with ministers accountable to elected bodies rather than to the sovereign's whim alone. But they will never get the chance. And the man who ensures they never get the chance is Otto von Bismarck. Bismarck, by 1870, is already a legend. Born in 1815 to a Junker family of modest distinction in Brandenburg, he has risen through a combination of brutal intelligence, iron will, and a capacity for strategic vision that borders on the preternatural. He has unified Germany through 3 precisely calibrated wars: against Denmark in 1864, against Austria in 1866, against France in 1870, and he has done so not through reckless aggression, but through a mastery of European politics that leaves his contemporaries perpetually outmaneuvered. Thus he has proclaimed the German Empire in the Hall of Mirrors at Versailles while France still burns. He has created a constitutional structure designed, above all, to keep himself in power. Because this is the central truth about Bismarck, that must be understood before any of the rest makes sense. He is not merely a statesman, he is a system. Everything he builds, the alliances, the laws, the political coalitions, the constitutional arrangements, is constructed with a single load-bearing pillar, the confidence of the Kaiser. Without that confidence, the entire structure collapses. Bismarck knows this. He has known it since 1862, when a desperate Wilhelm I, cornered by a rebellious parliament, called him to Berlin as a last resort. Bismarck saved him then, and the old Kaiser never forgot it. For 28 years, their relationship functions like a marriage of necessity. Two men who often disagree, but who need each other too completely to part. The Crown Prince and his English wife present a different proposition entirely. They intend to govern differently, and Bismarck has no intention of being governed differently. So in the 1880s, when Prince Wilhelm, the grandson, comes of age, Bismarck makes his calculation. He separates the boy from his parents. He brings him to the foreign ministry for training, tutored by Herbert von Bismarck, the Chancellor's own son. He teaches the young prince about Prussian prerogatives, about the divine right of monarchs, about the dangers of English liberal ideas. He shapes him, deliberately, as a weapon against the very parents who had hoped to shape Germany into something new. It is, in retrospect, one of the most consequential miscalculations in modern history. Bismarck creates the instrument of his own destruction. The young Prince Wilhelm absorbs his lessons with the intensity of the insecure and the grandiose. His childhood has not been easy. The withered arm is a constant mortification. A prince who cannot ride properly, who cannot dress himself without assistance, whose body has betrayed the image he must project. His mother, well-intentioned but tactless in the manner of the very confident, subjects him to years of painful exercises and remedial therapies in hopes of correcting what cannot be corrected. There is a kind of grinding cruelty in the kindness, and Wilhelm grows up feeling that his mother is ashamed of him, that he must earn the approval of those around him through sheer force of will and spectacular display. Yet he compensates magnificently. He collects uniforms the way other men collect debts, hundreds of them, for every regiment, every occasion, every fantasy of martial glory. He speaks in pronouncements. He demands ceremony. He performs constantly and exhaustlessly the role of the supreme warlord he believes himself to be. One contemporary observer, watching him with the precision of a physician, writes that he is gifted with a quick understanding, sometimes brilliant, but at the same time superficial, hasty, restless, unable to relax, desperate for applause and success, romantic, sentimental, theatrical, unsure, and arrogant, with an immeasurably exaggerated self-confidence and a desire to show off. As Bismarck himself will observe with characteristic dry accuracy, the young Kaiser wants every day to be his birthday. There is also the matter of England. Victoria's son has inherited from his mother a deep fascination with and resentment of British power. He adores the Royal Navy. He covets the empire that flies the Union Jack across a quarter of the globe. He visits his grandmother, Queen Victoria, the old matriarch at Windsor, with something approaching reverence. And yet beneath the admiration runs a vein of envy, so pure it is almost geological. He wants what Britain has. He wants a fleet. He wants colonies. He wants the world to fear Germany the way it fears the British Empire. He wants, in the phrase that will become infamous, Germany's place in the sun. Bismarck, by contrast, already has Germany's place in the sun, and he has no interest in expanding it. Since 1871, his foreign policy has been governed by a single, overriding principle: the preservation of what Germany has already won. Europe must not unite against the new German Empire. France, humiliated and stripped of Alsace-Lorraine, is an implacable enemy. That cannot be changed. But France can be isolated. And Bismarck builds his famous system of alliances with precisely that purpose. The Three Emperors League binds Germany to Russia and Austria-Hungary. The dual alliance with Austria provides security from the east. The Reinsurance Treaty, a secret document of breathtaking diplomatic audacity, ensures that Russia will remain neutral even in a conflict involving Austria, a direct contradiction of what Russia believes the dual alliance means. Bismarck holds all the threads simultaneously in his own hands, or entrusts no one else to hold them. It is a brilliant system. It is also completely unsustainable without Bismarck himself at the center of it. And as the 1880s advance, the threads begin to strain. In March of 1888, the old Kaiser Wilhelm I dies in Berlin at the age of 90. He has been emperor in name for 17 years, but the empire has been Bismarck's. His passing is noted with proper solemnity, but the true anxiety centers on what comes next. Crown Prince Friedrich becomes Kaiser Friedrich III. He is 56 years old, liberal in conviction, married to his English Victoria, ready at last to begin the reign of reform his followers have anticipated for a generation. He is also dying. In short, the throat cancer that has been devouring him for months renders him unable to speak above a whisper. He communicates by notes, now passed to ministers and courtiers with a hand that grows weaker by the week. His reign lasts 99 days. In June of 1888, he is gone. It is the year of the three Kaisers, and in June the throne passes to the 29-year-old, who has been shaped, manipulated, tutored, and ultimately liberated by Otto von Bismarck. The man who sought to use this boy as an instrument is about to discover that the instrument has developed its own intentions. The relationship between the new Kaiser and his Chancellor begins in apparent cordiality. Wilhelm has admired Bismarck since adolescence, has been trained to admire him, worships him in the way that young men worship powerful older figures who seem to possess the certainty they themselves lack. He calls him brilliant. He speaks of working together. He is, in the first weeks of his reign, almost deferential, but beneath the surface something darker moves. Wilhelm has watched his father be sidelined. He has watched his mother be frustrated. He has observed, over years, how Bismarck controls the flow of information to the throne, how he monopolizes access to ministers, how he has constructed a government in which the Chancellor is indispensable and the Kaiser is, functionally, ceremonial. And Wilhelm II has not the slightest intention of being ceremonial. He wants to rule, not merely to reign, to rule. He wants to set the agenda, to direct policy, to be the decision-maker in fact, as well as in theory. As one contemporary wit puts it with perfect precision, the Kaiser wants to be the bridegroom at every wedding and the corpse at every funeral. He wants to be the center of every event, the subject of every attention, the author of every outcome. This is not compatible with the continued existence of Otto von Bismarck. The collision, when it comes, does not arrive along a single dramatic fault line. It accumulates, like geological pressure, across a dozen smaller conflicts that each seem manageable in isolation, but together constitute an irresistible force, meeting an immovable object. The first area of genuine friction is foreign policy. Bismarck, cautious, conservative, focused on the European balance, wants to maintain the Reinsurance Treaty with Russia, the secret agreement that keeps the Tsar from drifting into France's orbit. Wilhelm finds Russia troubling, its autocracy unfamiliar, and its Slavic character alien to his Prussian instincts. Around him, advisors whisper that the treaty is dishonest, that it contradicts Germany's commitments to Austria, that it should be allowed to lapse. The young Kaiser, who lacks Bismarck's depth of understanding and patience for complexity, listens to the whispers. Then comes the labor question. In 1889, a wave of strikes sweeps through Germany's coal mines, and the empire faces something it has not confronted at this scale before. Organized workers demanding better conditions, shorter hours, protection from the arbitrary power of the industrial owners. The Social Democrats, that specter Bismarck has spent a decade trying to suppress, through his anti-socialist laws, emerge from the Reichstag elections of February 1890 as the single party with more votes than any other in the country. Bismarck's response is characteristically confrontational. He wants to tighten the laws, provoke the socialists into overreach, manufacture a domestic crisis that will allow him to revise the Constitution in an authoritarian direction and make himself, once again, indispensable. He will crush the labor movement by setting a trap and letting it spring. Wilhelm looks at this calculation and recoils. He does not want to begin his reign by ordering troops to fire on German workers. He is 29 years old, and he genuinely, at this moment, wants to be loved. He imagines a different approach, concessions, protections, a gesture of imperial benevolence that will win the workers away from Marxist agitation and toward loyalty to the throne. He issues a royal decree in February 1890 promising social reforms and protections for labor. He calls a ministerial conference, and he maneuvers around Bismarck and goes directly to the State Council for the decree he wants. Bismarck is enraged, not merely at being outmaneuvered. He has been outmaneuvered before, but at being outmaneuvered by this boy, this creation of his own making, this instrument that has developed the impertinence to refuse the hand that forged it. He works against the Kaiser's decree behind the scenes. He seeks to sabotage it. He manipulates parliamentary factions to preserve his own position. But there is a more immediate flashpoint, and it concerns a piece of paper. The Cabinet Order of 1852, a Prussian regulation from before the empire existed, specifies that the Minister-President of Prussia must be present whenever a minister meets with the King of Prussia. In theory, this rule has been defunct for years. His ministers come and go to the Kaiser's presence as needs require. But Bismarck, sensing that Wilhelm is meeting with his ministers and building alliances without him, dusts off the old order and invokes it as a weapon. No minister shall have access to the emperor except through the chancellor. It is, in isolation, a bureaucratic dispute. In reality, it is a declaration of war, because what it means, stripped of its formal language, is this: Bismarck is attempting to cut the Kaiser off from his own government. When Wilhelm learns that Bismarck has revived this order, and more humiliatingly, that the Tsar Alexander III has apparently made a mocking comment about the young Kaiser that Bismarck has deliberately ensured will reach Wilhelm's ears, the confrontation becomes unavoidable. On the morning of March 15, 1890, the Kaiser's messenger arrives at the Chancellery at 9 in the morning. The Chancellor is to appear at the Foreign Office within half an hour. The meeting that follows is extraordinary by any measure. Two men face each other across the weight of 28 years of German history, the old man who built the empire and the young Kaiser who inherited it. Bismarck is ill, his massive body bowed by gout and exhaustion, his face red with fury. Wilhelm is formal, cold, controlled in the manner of someone who has rehearsed the scene many times in his mind. The air between them is charged with something beyond politics. It is personal, primal, the collision of two personalities that can no longer share the same room without one of them being destroyed. Bismarck, according to his own later account, is not a man who yields. But he refuses to back down from the cabinet order. He accuses the Kaiser of undermining him, of meeting with ministers behind his back, of failing to understand how government actually works. He has managed 3 Kaisers. He has been chancellor since before this young man could walk. He is not accustomed to justifying himself. Wilhelm, for his part, is equally unyielding. He has made his decision. He will not be managed. He will not be kept from his own ministers. He will not be surrounded by the walls of Bismarckian control and called it freedom. He wants simply and completely to govern. The meeting ends without resolution, but both men understand that resolution has already occurred. The only remaining question is the timing of its announcement. It takes 3 days. 3 days during which both men maneuver for tactical advantage. at each trying to ensure that when the parting is announced, the story told afterward will favor his version of events. Bismarck wants to publish his letter of resignation as an indictment. Wilhelm wants the world to see a chancellor who is stepping aside voluntarily with dignity and appropriate honors. On March 18, 1890, Bismarck puts his resignation in writing. His letter is remarkable, controlled in its formal language, but seething beneath the surface. He speaks of having believed he was still useful to his sovereign, of now understanding that his services are no longer required. He does not grovel. He does not concede the argument. He withdraws, but he withdraws without surrendering. 2 days later, he is on the train at Lehrter Bahnhof, and the crowd is calling his name. The departure carries its own extraordinary symbolism. For the well-connected observers who push onto that platform, there is a sense of witnessing something not merely political but historical. The end of an age, the closing of a chapter whose dimensions they cannot yet fully perceive. Heinrich von Treitschke, one of the great historians of the era, writes with the passion of grief, "Not since Themistocles has the world seen such a tragic fate, and yet, even in that moment of apparent sympathy, something else is present, something harder to admit, but no less real: relief. Because Otto von Bismarck, for all his genius, has become something many Germans find unbearable. He rules by intimidation. He destroys opponents with a thoroughness that borders on pleasure. He has no patience for colleagues who disagree, no tolerance for complexity that threatens his control. There's no interest in governing through persuasion when manipulation is faster. He has kept Germany in a state of permanent dependency on his vision, his relationships, his ability to hold contradictions in alignment, and that dependency, for a growing, confident, industrializing nation, has begun to chafe. As the train disappears and the crowd disperses, Germany is left to discover whether it can stand without its crutch. The answer arrives quickly, and it is not reassuring. Wilhelm II, now freed from the shadow he has spent 2 years escaping, embarks on what he calls the new course. He will be his own chancellor. He will set his own direction. He appoints Leo von Caprivi as his successor, a decent military man with no political gifts beyond obedience. Then he sets about dismantling what Bismarck built. The first casualty is the reinsurance treaty with Russia. The advisors around Wilhelm, younger men without Bismarck's European depth, argue that the treaty is incompatible with German honor, that it cannot be reconciled with the spirit of the dual alliance with Austria. They allow it to lapse in June 1890. Bismarck, watching from his estate, understands what this means immediately. Russia, finding its bond with Germany severed, begins to look elsewhere. Within 4 years, it has negotiated a military alliance with France. The isolation of France that Bismarck spent 2 decades constructing, the single non-negotiable premise of his entire foreign policy, is undone in 4 years. The Europe of 1895 looks fundamentally different from the Europe of 1889. Germany, which under Bismarck stood at the center of a web of alliances that gave it room to maneuver in every direction, now finds itself increasingly hemmed in. Britain, Russia, and France begin to find common ground in their shared anxiety about German ambitions. The encirclement that Bismarck worked his entire career to prevent is being assembled brick by brick by the policy decisions of the Kaiser, who dismissed him. Wilhelm, characteristically, does not recognize this as encirclement. He recognizes it as provocation. He responds not with diplomacy, but with assertion, with naval expansion, colonial ambitions, a rhetoric of German greatness that alternately alarms and bewilders the other courts of Europe. Tsar Alexander III, who has watched Wilhelm closely, describes him to his ministers as a badly brought-up young man of bad faith. The phrase circulates quietly through the chancelleries of Europe. Meanwhile, in the Sachsenwald forest outside Hamburg, The retired chancellor is not quiet. Far from it. Bismarck in exile proves as formidable an opponent as Bismarck in office, perhaps more so because in exile he has nothing to lose. He receives a stream of visitors at Friedrichsruhe, his estate, which becomes a kind of anti-court, an alternative center of gravity that the real court in Berlin cannot ignore. Foreign observers call him the true leader of the opposition. German nationalists make pilgrimages to the Sachsenwald as one might make a pilgrimage to a shrine. He grants interviews. He criticizes policy. He warns darkly and repeatedly about the consequences of abandoning the Russian connection. When he tells anyone who will listen, and many will listen, that Germany is being steered toward catastrophe by a man who understands nothing of the currents he claims to command. The feud reaches its particular nadir in 1892 at the wedding of Bismarck's eldest son, Herbert, in Vienna. Kaiser Wilhelm II does what only a man of extraordinary smallness would do in such a moment. He asks the Austrian Emperor Franz Joseph to deny the retired chancellor an audience. The slight is public and deliberate. Bismarck, on his return journey through Germany, stops in city after city and delivers speeches criticizing the government with a directness that makes diplomatic language seem quaint. The crowds receive him with an enthusiasm that infuriates the Kaiser and deeply unsettles his ministers. Wilhelm cannot resist the impulse to respond in kind. In what becomes known as his pygmy speech, he reduces the chancellor who made Germany to a mere henchman of his grandfather, a functionary who executed the vision of Wilhelm I and nothing more. The audacity of the claim is breathtaking. Bismarck, who has won 3 wars, unified a nation, preserved European peace through 20 years of diplomacy, and rebuilt the entire international order, reduced to a henchman. The word lands in the press and in the salons of Europe like something between a joke and an obscenity. There are attempts at reconciliation. In 1894, a meeting is arranged, and the two men face each other again. Older now, the chancellor white-haired and increasingly frail, the Kaiser still performing his ceaseless theater of authority. The photographs from this encounter show two men sitting with enormous physical distance between them, the body language of each communicating what the diplomatic language carefully conceals. In 1895, Wilhelm visits Friedrichsruhe. In 1897, he comes again. This last visit, historians note, tinged with something approaching unease, as if even the Kaiser senses that this old man knows things about how empires are held together that no one else still alive can explain. The years are not kind to Bismarck in his exile. His wife Johanna, the anchor of his private world for 47 years, dies in November 1894. After her death, he tells his family doctor, with a weariness that goes beyond politics, "My trumpet no longer makes a sound, it is full of holes." He waits in the silence of the Sachsenwald for the government to seek his counsel. Yet the government does not seek his counsel. He waits for Germany to recognize its error. Germany, busy with its new course and its naval expansion and its dreams of imperial glory, does not yet see the error, though the error is being constructed, stone by stone, all around it. He writes his memoirs in these final years. Thoughts and Memories, a work of literary genius and selective truth, in which he settles scores, dramatizes every confrontation, and presents himself, always and without apology, as the indispensable man whom small minds could not appreciate. He publishes in deliberate breach of national security the secret text of the reinsurance treaty with Russia, an act that is simultaneously a final strategic warning to Germany and a personal attack on the Kaiser, who betrayed the policy it represented. And any ordinary man would have faced prosecution for such a disclosure. Bismarck is not ordinary, and the government, calculating the outrage that prosecution would generate, lets it pass. He arranges, with the precision of a man who has managed his image across 6 decades of public life, one final act of defiance. His tombstone, he instructs, is to carry a specific epitaph, carefully chosen, devastatingly pointed. When the granite is finally carved, it will read, "Here lies a true servant of the Emperor Wilhelm I, not Wilhelm II, not the current Kaiser, the grandfather, the old man who understood his chancellor's worth. The repudiation is eternal, literally set in stone." Otto von Bismarck dies at Friedrichsruh on July 30th, 1898. He is 83 years old. His private secretary, Moritz Busch, publishes his scathing letter of resignation, the one that Wilhelm had forbidden from public release, in a Berlin newspaper on the day of his death. Even in dying, the chancellor lands one last blow. The letter serves, as it was designed to serve, as an indictment from the grave. The magazine Punch, which had published the Dropping the Pilot cartoon 8 years earlier, marks his passing with another image. A medieval funeral procession, the representatives of Germany's constituent states carrying the knight who unified them all. The symbolism is precise. A knight being carried, not a chancellor walking. Something has ended, but what exactly has ended and what it means, that will take decades and catastrophes to become clear. Wilhelm II continues his new course into the new century with the relentlessness of a man who has never been corrected by consequences. He builds his navy, challenging British supremacy on the seas with the Tirpitz Plan, a strategy that will accomplish the precise opposite of its intent, transforming Britain from a cautious neutral into a determined opponent. He acquires colonies in China and the Pacific, satisfying the demand for prestige while creating new friction with the established imperial powers. He makes speeches of spectacular tactlessness, the worst of which, the 1908 Daily Telegraph interview, offends the British so comprehensively that it damages his position even at home, where the Reichstag finally moves to censure the behavior of its sovereign. He surrounds himself, as years pass, with men who tell him what he wants to hear. The strong and independent are unwelcome at his court. The flatterers and the yes-men prosper. Germany, the most powerful continental economy in Europe, the nation with the finest army and some of the most advanced industries in the world, is steered increasingly by a man who is, in the phrase of his own most detailed psychological portrait, scarcely capable of learning from experience. The alliance system that Bismarck built to prevent a general European war is, by 1914, replaced by something far more dangerous, a two-bloc system, the Triple Alliance against the Triple Entente, in which any local conflict risks becoming a continental conflagration. Russia and France are bound together, as Bismarck always feared they would be if Germany made a mistake. Britain has found its way into an informal understanding with both of them. Germany's only reliable ally is Austria-Hungary, the empire that Bismarck himself called, with characteristic bluntness, the most fragile structure in Europe. In July 1914, a Serbian nationalist kills the heir to the Austrian throne in Sarajevo. Wilhelm II, on vacation on his yacht, returns to Berlin in a state of agitation, writing his famous marginal notes on the diplomatic dispatches, emotional, contradictory, impulsive, the written record of a man making historic decisions without the depth to understand their weight. He gives Austria his famous blank check of support, promising German backing for whatever action Vienna chooses to take. It is a decision of staggering irresponsibility, made by a man who has spent his reign dismantling the mechanisms that Bismarck built specifically to prevent such a moment. The war that follows kills 20 million people. Germany, fighting on two fronts, exactly the scenario Bismarck considered the ultimate strategic nightmare, is ground down across 4 years of industrial slaughter. In November 1918, the Kaiser abdicates and flees to the Netherlands, where he will live in dignified exile until 1941, chopping wood and growing old and writing his memoirs and maintaining, until the end, that history has treated him unjustly. He outlives his empire by 23 years. He outlives his dynasty. He outlives the world that produced him. The question of whether the catastrophe was inevitable, whether a different Kaiser would have changed the ultimate shape of the 20th century, is one that historians will argue through the years that follow. Some will insist that Bismarck himself, with his artificial political structures and his permanent management of crises rather than their resolution, left Germany in a position from which no successor could have easily governed. They will point out correctly that the man who cultivated Wilhelm's worst instincts in order to use him against the liberal crown prince created the very dragon that consumed him. They will argue that the Bismarckian system was always fragile, always dependent on a single extraordinary intelligence, always one death or one dismissal away from collapse. While others will point with equal force to what actually happened after 1890. The reinsurance treaty was not lapsed by structural forces. It was lapsed by specific decisions made by specific men who chose short-term clarity over long-term security. The Russian alliance with France was not foreordained. It was the predictable consequence of Germany stepping back from its relationship with St. Petersburg. The naval buildup that turned Britain from passive observer to active opponent was not demanded by German strategic necessity. It was the product of one Kaiser's obsession with his grandmother's fleet. And the blank check of July 1914 was not signed by history. It was signed by a man. What Bismarck understood, with the precision of a mind that spent 40 years in the engine room of European power, was that Germany was a young and fragile empire surrounded by older, more established powers who would, given the right provocation, unite against it. His entire career was an exercise in denying them that provocation, in ensuring that Germany was always too useful to too many of them to become their common enemy. It required patience, contradiction, the willingness to pursue goals through indirection, the discipline to stop short of what was achievable when achieving it would cost more than it was worth. Wilhelm II possessed none of these qualities. He was brilliant in flashes and hollow in depth. He was capable of charm and incapable of restraint. He wanted to be admired and was constitutionally unable to earn admiration in the ways that actually preserve empires. He wanted every day to be his birthday, and he ran his foreign policy accordingly, with the logic of a man who believes that wanting something loudly and assertively enough will cause the world to provide it. The world did not provide it. The world pushed back. On that March morning in 1890, as the train carrying Bismarck pulled out of Berlin and the crowd on the platform stood with their hats in their hands, the Germany that existed was not yet the Germany that the next 30 years would create. It was still, in most essentials, the Germany that Bismarck had built. An empire of remarkable power held in a system of relationships that gave it room and security and options. It was a Germany that other nations feared, but also needed. That was central to the European equilibrium precisely because Bismarck had made it so. The Germany of 1914 is something different, is something that has convinced itself it is hemmed in and encircled, that the world conspires against its rightful place, that only force and assertion can secure what diplomacy has failed to win. It is a Germany that has been told for 24 years what its Kaiser wanted to hear and has come to believe it. The pilot who was dropped from the ship in 1890 spent his final 8 years watching from the shore, warning of the rocks ahead, waiting for a summons that never came. He died having written his tombstone's epitaph with the precision of a man who never lost his mastery of the pointed phrase, a servant of Wilhelm I, not the one who dismissed him. His empire outlasted him by 20 years. His warnings outlasted his empire. History does not permit us the comfort of the counterfactual. We cannot know what a different Kaiser, or a Bismarck who lived another decade, or a Europe that made different choices in the summer of 1914 might have produced. What we can know is what actually happened. An old man was dismissed by a young one who believed he understood more than he did. A system built on a single intelligence was handed to a man who lacked that intelligence. A Germany shaped by 40 years of calculated restraint was released into the hands of a Kaiser who considered restraint to be weakness. And the world paid for it. For 30 years, from the guns of August 1914 to the ruins of May 1945, the world paid for it. In the forests of the Sachsenwald, beside the grave that bears its pointed epitaph, the pilot waits in the silence of the long-proved right.